Okay, hey, this is Matt. I'm going to talk really fast about my progress in using a .NET user control class in the form designer to mimic the container that we have over in Fox Pro to access individually contained a container of a bunch of individual controls. This is a .NET C# WinForms app right here. Okay, so some of this works in X# presently in the WinForms app, but it's going to need some work to make it work fully. But let me show you. Here's a .NET user control right here. It's called a user control class. If you look at it, it is right there. It inherits from user control. Inside of it, in the visual designer, I was able to drag a label, a text box, and a button. And I won't go through it, but all you have to do is put some properties, some getter setter properties on the class, and then you add these attributes that tell it that this is a bindable, editable property in the designer when this user control class is used on another form. So those are just very easy code to type in after you drag the controls on there. Those controls are initially private. But you can add these property getter setters public, and then that will expose them when you put these attributes. And you got to add a few using statements up here as well. The other trick thing about this is that besides just these attributes, you also have to tell this other attribute in the class itself. You identify what they call a control designer class. Okay, and that tells it wires it all up. So in this same code for the user control at the very bottom, I was able to put this simple little designer class, and it inherits from .NET something called a parent control designer. So I gave it my designer. It accepts a component, which is the user control class itself. And what you do then is you come in here and add these calls to this enable design mode, and you pick from all these public getters up here that you define for the individual controls. You just add them in this enable design mode call right here. Okay, so this one little simple class down here for the designer class, plus an attribute up here on the user control class, plus individual attributes on the individual getters and setters. Okay, that's the wiring that makes this a beautifully dynamic usable control. So if we go over to our form, this is an instance of that user control class that I was able to drag out of the designer, drop it on the form. But the real beauty of all this mess is that finally we can go in there. I didn't mean to put this extra one. Let me click it and delete that. We can go in there and see I am, besides the class as a whole, that's the class, the user class as one single object. But look, I am able within there to click on each individual stinking little UI object within that container. So on the one hand, they're contained in here. As you can see, they move around, but I can go inside of there and move it, and those persist inside of it. Okay. So, and in the property window over here, look, when I'm selected on this one control, see all these, the button, that's the button, here's the label, the text box, those appear here in the properties window, and I can drill into them. If I don't want to visually move this label, I can drill into it in the property window. In fact, it scopes to it. If I click that text box, this thing over here is scoping up to that. And I can come over here and just set the location this way. I can move it up to 12,0 and see it moved it to the top right over here. So I can do it visually or from the property window, okay? All because I made a user control class, and that could be off in a separate class library and referenced in here. But then when we put it on this darn form, we get what I think is pretty much the same darn thing we have over in Fox Pro, where it can work on containers of individual objects. And if you look at, let's see, here's the form itself. If you look at the form, the user control is created right here. And any code changes that I make or any property changes that I make over in those property windows, well, those things are getting written out in this code behind right here in the designer. I could come here and just manually change the code right here as well if I wanted to, of course. And I've done it. I'm going to stop my video now because I don't want this to run forever. But you can also go in and on these individual controls, you put click code for that particular button. So there's some wiring you have to do there with the event thing so that